Hi. In this short lecture, I want to talk to you about some of the challenges of listening. And the first topic I want to discuss are forms of ineffective listening. And one of the most common forms that we see is something called pseudo-listening. If you're pseudo-listening, what you're doing is you're giving the appearance of listening when you're really not. Now, this is something we've all done plenty of times, right? Someone's talking to you and you get bored with what they're saying, or you're not really interested in it, but you don't want to hurt their feelings. So as a result, you provide feedback as if you're listening when you're really not. So maybe you're nodding your head in the right places, you're making eye contact, you're making the appropriate facial expressions, you're doing everything that you would normally do when you're listening while you're thinking about something else entirely. Another form of ineffective listening that we often engage in, unfortunately, is what we call stage hogging. And people who do this are also called conversational narcissists. Now, people who do this, right, people who are guilty of stage hogging, are those people who try and turn the conversations to themselves all the time. So, an example of this comes in what we, in communication, called the shift response. So you go to somebody and you say, "Oh man, I had the worst day today." And their response is, "Oh, you think you had a bad day? Wait till I tell you about mine," right? So these conversational narcissists switch the topic in the response to themselves, right? So no matter what happened to you, what happened to them is always more interesting. Another form of ineffective listening that we often see is what we call selective listening. And this is when people respond only to parts of your remarks, but disregard others. Now, this is something that I see all the time, for example, with my kids. So I might tell my boys, right, if you clean up your rooms, then I'll get you ice cream. Right? And half an hour later, they'll say, "Hey, Dad, you told us we could get ice cream." But of course, that's not what I told them. What I told them was, if you clean up your room, you get ice cream. But they're performing selective listening, right? They only hear, "You'll get ice cream," or at least pretend that they only hear that, right? So that's selective listening. Another form of ineffective listening is insulated listening, and this is where we avoid certain topics of conversation. Many of us do this because there are things that sometimes we don't want to talk about. Sore spots, sensitive subjects that we don't want to discuss with other people. And when we avoid these topics, we're doing what's called insulated listening. There are also people that perform something known as defensive listening. And this is when we take other people's remarks as personal attacks. So if you've ever said something to someone, didn't mean anything by it, but they become very offended, "Oh, why would you say that about me," right? What's happening is they're doing what we call defensive listening. Ambushing is another one of my personal favorites. This is where you listen carefully to other people and you collect information to use and attack later. This is something that unfortunately I'm guilty of, and many of the women that I've known throughout my life have been guilty of. This is where you listen to people and you sort of file away things that they tell you to bring back later, right? That's so that when you're in that really bad argument, you can whip it out and use it on them. "Oh yeah, well, at least my mother isn't a crack whore," right? Or what have you. So that's ambushing, right? Is collecting information now to use later. And then there's also another form of ineffective listening known as insensitive listening. Now, insensitive listeners tend to lack empathy and oftentimes miss nonverbal cues. So as a result, they respond to superficial communication, right, to what the person is saying, the sort of the thinnest of messages, but miss the deeper meanings, right? They don't understand what's really happening, or they choose not to, right? We've all engaged in insensitive listening, I suggest to you. This is, you ask somebody, "How's it going?" "Oh, okay, I guess." "Okay, good. Glad to hear you're doing well," right? Now, a person who responds in that manner obviously isn't doing well, but maybe you don't want to talk about it. Maybe you don't want to hear them whine about it, right? So what you're doing in that case is you're performing insensitive listening, right? You're lacking in empathy or sympathy, and you're ignoring or missing their nonverbal cues to let you know that they're trying to say something more than the actual words that are coming out of their mouths. Now, there are a number of reasons why we don't listen that well, right? Why we're not good listeners. One of those reasons is related to what we call message overload. Now, this is pretty simple, right? With message overload, you just get too much in the way of messages, right? Or too many messages. You become overwhelmed with all the information that someone's sending you, right? This happens to me all the time, or used to happen to me when I would stop and ask somebody for directions. I'm sure that you've had this happen to you at some point, right? You stop and you ask someone, oh, hey, how do I get to this place? Okay, well, you go down the street and you make a right, go to the fourth light, make a left, go about 1.5 miles down the road, make another left, right? And as they're telling you all these steps, it's just too much information to attend to and understand all at once, right? It's message overload. This happens in class all the time too, right? Where you're sitting in class and the teacher's going through things so quickly and you're just receiving too much information at once and you can't make sense of it. Now, also, we sometimes experience what's known as preoccupation. And this is when you're wrapped up with your own personal life and your own personal concerns that seem, at least at the time, more important than the messages that others are sending. So, for example, maybe you just broke up with your boyfriend or girlfriend and you're sitting in class and the teacher's up there lecturing away, but you can't really pay attention because you're sitting there like, oh God, I miss them so much, right? And all your personal troubles are getting in the way of you attending to and understanding the messages that are being sent out to you. Another reason we don't listen that well is related to something called rapid thought. And this has to do with the fact that we think much faster than people speak. So in general, we think at a rate of about 600 words per minute. But people only speak at a rate of about 100 to 150 words per minute. And as a result, there's a big lag there, right? So you can hear somebody's messages or message, and then you use all that spare time to think of things that are unrelated to what the speaker's saying, right? You sort of wander off in your own mind thinking about other things while they're trying to convey their message and trying to get the words out, right? So again, you can process speech much more quickly than people can speak it. Another reason we don't listen that well is related to effort and the fact that listening is hard work. In fact, listening is physical work. We know that when you're really attending to something, when you're really listening, your heart rate goes up, your breathing quickens, respiration is breathing, right? Your breathing quickens, your body temperature goes up, right? It's hard to pay attention to something. It's hard to make meaning out of messages. I can remember that I had a graduate course that was really hard, right? Like it was a difficult subject, and I used to go in. It was at night, and it was a 3-hour course, so you'd be in there from 7:30 till 10:30 at night. And all I would do is go in and sit in a chair and listen, but at the end of those 3 hours, I was exhausted. And I can remember thinking to myself, like, oh, why am I so tired? Like, all I did was sit around. I just sat in a chair. I shouldn't be tired. But the reality is that making sense of messages, particularly complex messages, when you really have to attend to them and really work at understanding them, it's hard work. It's physically difficult. Now, of course, another reason we don't listen that well can be related to external noise. That's just the real-world distractions that are all around you, right? I swear, every time I have to lecture in a real class setting, someone's cutting the grass outside, right? And that's a distraction. That's external noise, and it can prevent the messages from getting through. At other times, we make what are called faulty assumptions. So someone might start talking to you about a subject, and you immediately assume, oh, I've heard it all before, right? Or I just can't understand what this person's trying to get at, right? These are both examples of faulty assumptions. And then finally, we can sometimes be sort of listening can be foiled, I should say, by a lack of apparent advantages. And when this happens, it just seems like it's better to speak than to listen, right? So the lack of apparent advantages can be related to faulty assumptions. That's why these two go one after the other, right? We might assume, oh, I've heard this all before, so it's better for me to speak than to sit and listen. All right, so overall, we know that people, most people, the vast majority of people, haven't had any real training in listening. And as a result, we all think that listening is natural, but good listening, the kind of listening that employers look for, the kind of listening that you need to have as a good student, is an acquired skill, right? So most people lack training in listening, and this is one of the reasons they're just not good at it. Indeed, what you've gotten in this short lecture is vastly more than most people ever get their entire lives in terms of training on listening, right? And of course, the other factor that can influence listening is our hearing problems, right? Physical or physiological difficulties that can make it hard for people to listen to the messages that others are sending. So this, of course, can cause negative reactions at times. We know that 2/3 of partners report feeling annoyed when their partner can't hear them, right? This is something that happens to me. My wife will, I'll say something to my wife who's in the other room, and she'll say, "What?" And I'll repeat myself. "What?" And I'll repeat myself. "What? I can't hear you." And by the third time, I'm pissed, right? When I have to say what I'm saying for the third time, it gets annoying, right? And so, I mean, this is all keyed in, and this is something I want to stress, something that you need to recognize. This is all keyed in to the idea that everyone wants to be listened to, right? They don't really want to be heard, they want to be listened to. And so even when people are trying to hear us or trying to listen to us, but they can't, right, it can be really annoying to us. And indeed, about a quarter of these people took it even a step further and said that they were hurt at the fact that the other person, or felt ignored, right, at the fact that the other person didn't hear them. And I mean, this could be because of a legitimate hearing problem, but it doesn't change the fact that people get upset when they think that other people aren't listening to them. So then what can we do to be better listeners? The first thing is talk less. Most of us talk too much when we're claiming to understand others. The other thing we can do is get rid of distractions. Try to eliminate external noise. Then don't judge people prematurely, right? Hear someone out. Try and understand their ideas, right? That understanding stage is very important. Try to understand the speaker's ideas before judging them. And then as they're speaking, look for key ideas. Try and understand what their important points are, what they're trying to say. Even really long-winded people have a point. So use that spare brain time you have to analyze what they're saying and look for key points. All right, that's it for this lecture. Thanks for checking it out.